Since I'm going to be doing this Portuguese style, you'll see that I have my yarn there to my right, and then I run it through over the middle finger of my right hand. Sometimes I'll even run it over my pinky, and then on a cord around my neck, I run the yarn through this gizmo here, which Walmart called a swivel hook. They had the same thing as part of a keychain. Or with medium and light yarn, you could even just run it through lanyard hooks. Instead of starting at the end, I'm going to begin here because I'll need this long tail to help make my cast on stitches. I'll talk more at the end about how long that tail needs to be. So I'm going to take both needles in my right hand and then getting my tail out of the way here. I'm going to wrap the yarn clockwise around my index finger, and that strand from my index finger to my middle finger is going to go over the needles. It'll only be this for this first stitch that I have this strand in the way. That needs to go under, the other strand goes over, and that's step one. Then with my thumb, I'm going to loop the yarn around both needles and keep my thumb there. That's step two. You might want to move your hands a little bit closer to you to keep that from being too tight. Then I'm going to bring that loop on my index finger down over both needles. That's step three. Now I let that loop fall off my index finger, let go with my thumb, and to tighten this first stitch, I'll need to pull away from me a little bit. So back in the starting position, wrap the yarn clockwise around my index finger, and here's step one, step two, step three. And now I can tighten just by pulling down. Back to starting position, step one, two, and three. Notice how my right thumb will cover up each new stitch that I make. So now let's speed up the video a little bit. So let's say this is how many stitches I wanted to cast on. Now I can take out one of the two needles, doesn't matter which one, and turn it around, and I'm ready to go. Now most people cast on to one needle. The reason I cast on to two is so that I can get them nice and loose, but you'll notice that they're also very consistently loose. If I try to cast on to one needle, they're either too tight for me to be able to knit into, or if I try to cast on loosely, it just ends up looking inconsistent and sloppy. To estimate how long a tail needs to be, I can't just count up some cast on stitches I've already made and then unravel it to see how much yarn was used, because every time I make a cast on stitch, I'm using yarn from both directions. So when I wrap the yarn around my left index finger, that's using up some yarn from the tail, but then when my thumb makes a loop around the needles, then I'm using up some yarn from the yarn ball to my right. So I'll need to start with a certain measurement of yarn. And I don't even need to use inches or feet. For my unit of measurement, I'm going to start with the yarn in the crook of my thumb, run it down around my elbow and back to my thumb, and I'm going to call that unit an elbow loop. And to save myself some time here, I'm just going to do a half elbow loop. So from my thumb to my elbow, I will take that measurement of yarn, and then beginning with the yarn in the palm of my left hand, let's see how many cast on stitches I can do with that amount of tail. And once again, I'll fast forward a bit here. 12, 14, 16, it looks like I have 18 cast on stitches. That's just with yarn from my thumb to my elbow though, so if I take that 18 times 2, I would get 36 cast on stitches for every elbow loop's worth of yarn. Let's say you needed to cast on 172 stitches. Divided by 36 would mean I would need 4.7 elbow loops worth of yarn. And yeah, you could round that up to 5, but I'd suggest even rounding it up to 5.5 or 6. You're always better off to have too much yarn than to do 170 stitches and suddenly run out of yarn. That's it for long tail cast-ons. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.